When you guys are done showing dog tattoos, we can start the show or
Well,
no?
Mark hasn't shown any of his dozen tattoos yet.
Come on, Mark, give us a view.
Do you really have tattoos, Mark?
No, it's a PG show, you know. So.
Hey guys, it's Bobby Iaccino, co-host of The Future's Edge. If you watch our show, you can come and join us live. We have an event going on with Scott Shellady, the famous cow guy. You've seen him on TV with his cow jacket, on Fox, on financial networks, as well as his own show on RFD TV, which is kind of a fun network. And the panel consists of myself, Jim Iuorio, Michael Lee, and Kenny Polcari. We all know Kenny Polcari very well. Great friend of mine and Jimmy's. And Michael Lee is one of the best sort of down to the bone stock analysts that you're ever going to meet. This is called The Cow Guy Invites You to Greener Pastures with the Common Sensocrats. So there will be policy. There will be politics as it applies to policy, as it applies to markets. So this thing is going to set you up for the next 12 months of investing. We've got a presentation, we've got drinks, we've got fraternization time, and we've got dinner. So check out the link, come to the show. You're going to enjoy it. Nashville, June 13th. We're going to have a blast. It's going to be at the Grand Hyatt Nashville. Great venue. We hope to see you all there.
Okay, welcome to the Future's Edge Show. I'm Jim Iuorio. That's Bob Iaccino. Today is going to be a very interesting show. We have Mark Glennon and Ted Dabrowski from Wirepoints. Wirepoints is an institution that is putting pressure on Illinois for change. Now, a lot of you out there are watching, and Bobby's one of them too, said, well, Illinois is beyond being helped. Forget about it. And that's not true. There's two things to remember here. One, there have been places that have had bad leadership and had a difficult time. Think of New York in the 70s and 80s when not one person would buy their bonds. They came out of that spin. Now think of Illinois right now. Illinois, yes, in a bad way. All we need is a couple things to fall our way to start heading us in a better direction, and these two are all about that. And by the way, everyone, like Bobby, shake your head if this is true. Everybody who leaves Illinois, which they're leaving in freaking droves, always in the back of their mind thinks Illinois is 100% non-savable, because that's a psychological kind of crutch, no?
No, that's not what I think at all. What I think is it can be saved by people like Mark and Ted, but I'm in my late 50s.
Okay.
And it's not going to be, it's not going to be saved while I still have a quality of life that allows me to enjoy it the way I used to. That's what I think.
And if anyone watching from around the country, I know our viewers are all over the country. If you think this isn't your problem, I think you're wrong. You know, we go and we get into wars in Russia and Ukraine because we're worried about what could come to our shores. All this bullshit can come to your shores too. One last thing before we start and bring these guys in the conversation too, because I want to start with you, Ted. So my understanding is that we started to go wrong with that knucklehead Michael Madigan 30 years ago, who truly believed that if you put all this money into public sector jobs and public sector pensions, we'd have this huge middle class of these people. When they're retirees, they spend all kinds of money. But guess what? Scottsdale, Arizona got the benefit, not Illinois. Am I right in thinking that's where this problem kind of began?
Well, I think that's part of it, but I think you're being too generous. I don't think that he thought that he was going to create this big middle class. I think it was more of a power play. And, the bigger the unions got, the more he took care of them, the more they take care of each other. And they'd create some kind of functioning Illinois. And, but over time, it really created this massive debt problem. But the problems are much bigger than that, of course.
Of course. And so, Mark, can we go over, we start with the amount of people, actual tax-paying people who are leaving the state of Illinois. And then I heard the governor talk about how many people are flocking to the state of Illinois last year, which was baffling to me, unless he's talking about migrants. But do you guys have statistics on that?
We do. Ted and John, his research assistant, have done a lot of great work on this. Every year, the IRS publishes migration data, which we think is actually better than the census data, because they got a hard count of how many taxpayers are coming and going and where they're moving to. And they release that every year. And in the most recent year, for example, we lost 109,000 net taxpayers. That's net, subtracting out the ones who moved in. taking with them over $100 billion of adjusted gross income with them. And that adds up, obviously. Bob, your state of Florida brought in $1 trillion in just a year of adjusted growth income. And of course, you add this up over time, Illinois has lost $500 billion of aggregate net income because of that. Those numbers don't lie, and those are the facts.
To add to that, I mean, I posted, actually, I've got pinned to my X, formerly Twitter, press conference with Governor DeSantis down here in Florida, doling out tax breaks. Now, we all know the state of Florida doesn't actually have any state taxes, but he was giving working people who accumulate a certain amount of toll receipts a discount on their tolls. He was doing a small sales tax cut, giving the surplus back to the residents of Florida. And this, to my earlier point, I speak very angrily about Chicago and Illinois, and my relatives and my friends that are still back there, including Jimmy, will get on me and be like, come on, you're a hater now, this and that. I'm angry with that because it is home to me, and it will always feel like home to me. And when I go back, I get angry. I go back and I see the condition that it's currently in, and I get angry. You guys talk about, and I don't care which one of you guys answers this, you guys talk about the federal money surplus, the bailout fund sent to states like Illinois and cities like Chicago as part of the problem and undermining the federalist system that we exist under. Can one of you explain what you mean by that?
Massive so-called federal COVID relief, was of course no such thing. It effectively functioned as a bailout for struggling cities and states, kept them alive for a few years. It's still being spent. Some of it's not spent. Chicago will run out at the end of this year. The school systems will run out of this year. That was $100 billion in aid to Illinois. Ted, correct me if I'm wrong on that total number.
No, 200 billion.
200 billion.
Private and public. Yeah,
that's right. And most of that was private sector, but that comes back to the state as well in the form of tax revenue and the rest. A lot of it went to the school system. A lot of it went to the municipalities of all kinds in Chicago. What have the other states done that didn't need this? They're lowering taxes. A majority of states have cut taxes since COVID started.
What does that mean? Cut taxes? These words make no sense to me.
Well, they're moving to lower income tax brackets. There's simply lower. Yeah, I didn't realize you were being facetious.
Mark finally got the joke. Right? We laugh while Rome is burning sometimes.
Right. By the way, don't let off Republicans too. Mike Madigan was a blight on the state, but Jim Edgar, Republican governor, put in place the infamous Edgar ramp, which was a can kick on pensions. That is a primary part of our problem. And there were a lot of Republicans, getting along and going along through the system that played the system as well. So yeah, it's primarily today a function of extreme leftist progressives that are killing the state, but Republicans share some blame along the way too.
If I can add some color. If I can add some color on those bailouts, yeah, this is why everybody should be really ticked off because the beginning of COVID, and I was opposed to any bailouts, period. But you could understand the argument at the beginning that some states were going to be in big trouble. But once we figured things out, and you looked at states' reserves, virtually all of them were going to make it. There were a few that were in trouble, and Illinois was one of them. And the reason why people should be ticked off is because Illinois, just prior to COVID, was one notch away from a junk rating. Their irresponsibility was showing up. It was finally, we're about to have to pay the penalties for all the sins that we've done. And then suddenly that $200 billion in private and public sector COVID aid just gave us massive inflows of income tax revenues, sales tax revenues, capital gains tax revenues. And guess what? Illinois had several upgrades since then. All these sins that were committed here can be ignored for the time being. And that was all because of a bailout.
And just one other point on your question about undermining federalism. That's a key function of the American system. The states are famously said to be laboratories of democracy. They're supposed to be. They're supposed to compete against each other on the quality of their services and the tax rates and everything else. Democrats in Washington know that full well, and they don't like it because it pushes states to function conservatively in a way that they don't like. So it was an attempt to undermine the federalist system.
Mm-hmm. Well, two things I want to highlight before I ask Ted a question sort of in a similar vein is your point about don't let the Republicans off the hook. I get bitched at Jim more than me about, you guys are just MAGA Republican, not even close. We're literally and Jim, this is Jim's line. We talk policy, not politics, no matter who puts bad policies forth. So people are going to be watching this and said, oh, this is another conservative podcast. Not at all. Bullshit. This is about saving a place that needs saving. And you two just happen to live in a blue state and discussing issues in a blue city that I called home for most of my life. So Ted, the crime problem. Okay, you mentioned earlier that the crime problem, not on this recording, but that it was part of the equity movement, and it is decriminalization and decentralization. Talk about that a little bit, because this is why I left.
Yeah, so we've had, of course, a long-running trend to where the equity movement, the social justice movement has meant, hey, let's not incarcerate these criminals. Let's give them breaks. And Kim Foxx, she's one of the George Soros funded state's attorneys. So she comes in, and what you've seen is this, and this, of course, this defund the police movement. Lori Lightfoot was, somewhat tied in that, and of course, Brandon Johnson, who's our new mayor, was openly embraced that before he came in. And so what we've seen is this crime problem, and of course, you add to the financial problems, you add crime and the other things we'll talk about, and you start to see more and more Blacks who are the victims, they suffer even more under this equity policy. So it's upside down, right? They're protecting a lot of criminals, and 80% or plus of the murders and other crimes are perpetuated by Blacks, and yet the victims, who are overwhelmingly Black, aren't protected. So we've had this problem with an increase in carjackings. We had the riots, of course, during 2020 and during the George Floyd riots. It has become a situation now where the people can commit crimes, and literally, I'd say that the chance of paying the price in Illinois has almost hit 0%. The arrest rate for major crimes is just 5%. And when you get out for most of your crimes, the chance that you'll get punished for crime right now, it's almost 0%. And that's why they keep doing it, because they can.
So then to you, Mark, is that because I keep posting this like once every couple of weeks, several of these big city mayors literally, this is not figurative in any way, they literally ran on pro-crime agendas, no matter how you want to slice it. I can think of at least 5 different policies that are inarguably pro-crime: defund the police, decriminalization for thefts under 1,000, no cash bail, no foot pursuit unless it's if you witness a violent crime or whatever that bullshit is. So they put these out there. They said this is what we're running on, and the people presumably voted for them, unless there was something weird going on. But what is the end game? Because I kind of think that if these urban centers fall, they'll just go hat in hand to the federal government again, expecting a bailout in our bailout nation, and that's really, it's more of a collectivist sort of thing that's happening. Do you agree or no?
It's going to get worse before it gets better. You talked about us saving the state. We're not going to in the near term. This is going to get bad. Everything you guys think in economics terms, everything resolves in the long run in economics. It's just a question of how bad it's going to get. And, we hope to have the solutions on the table and the proper assessment of the problems done by the time that happens. But there's really little hope for controlling this crime situation at this point. It's becoming very apparent. People are saying that there's a shortage of police. There clearly are. It's really part of the true deficit that Chicago is running right now. You're going to have to put a lot of cops on the street. You're going to have to, as Ted said, get prosecutors who prosecute them. And we don't have either at this point. Maybe we'll get a better state's attorney this fall in the election. But there's no money and no willingness at this point in Brandon Johnson's administration to put more cops on the street. So unfortunately, this weekend we had guys running down the street and holding big knives, chasing each other. It was all over the internet.
We should outlaw knives for sure.
On Michigan Avenue on a Sunday afternoon, North Michigan Avenue. There were migrants too, by the way, Venezuelan migrants. That doesn't help. We don't know who's coming in. The migrant situation, of course, is a disaster in itself. That alone will destroy not just Illinois, but the entire country if it's not corrected.
So I want to get back to that migrant thing. I had a question for Ted first, but the migrant thing drives me bonkers. So Ted, in this time of year in 2020, maybe it was out as far as June or July, was well documented me saying, guess what's going to happen? COVID is going to absolutely ravage the 5 states that absolutely need the most federal government assistance, whether it does or not. There's going to be closures of schools, closures of businesses. There's going to be heavy-handed, because then that 200, I think it was like 210 billion that you said came to the state, then it seems more reasonable to have that argument to go to the federal government and ask for money. What I'm saying is I think there was so much bullshit wrapped up into all this that it doesn't pass any sort of sniff test at all. Do you agree with that?
Oh, I totally agree. Now, that's why I think in the end, most states, it's not, I think, in the end, most states didn't need any money at all. And the numbers were clear on that once you got past once you did the first package, I forget what the first package was called, and then you had reserves taken into account, most states were fine. The ones in trouble were the bad ones like us. And, I have to remind people that we were the first state to go begging to Congress for money. One of our senators asked for $40 billion right off the bat, saying we need money. And most of that was for pensions and other stuff. And then, of course, later on, it turned out to be much more. But no, and it bastardized everything now, because now we have no idea how to look at budgets anymore. We don't understand. Our budget today is about 30% bigger than it was just 4 years ago. And the numbers mean nothing because everything's inflated. You've got all this, you still have the money flowing through. So we've lost a bit of control over what budgeting means. We'll have to wait a while to see how it all plays out.
So I've only spent 4 years and 6 months of my life out of Chicago, Chicagoland area. I said I'm in my late 50s. I spent 40 some odd years in the city limits. And I abandoned you guys. And this may be a weird time to ask this question, but I wanted to get it into the middle of the show. You guys exist on donations. And you lost donations because of some of the policies. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah.
So based on that, tell me what you guys, like, honestly, what does Wirepoints do? You guys are out there fighting the good fight as opposed to me, who ran like a coward. You guys are out there fighting for the place that you call home. So what do you guys do, and what do those donations do if we can help you guys? And then if you could, either one of you, both of you, I don't care, expand on how Illinois is where it is one of the places it's going to spread from. And I may feel this in a place like Florida if we don't do something.
Let me just make one point there about the spread. And Jim, you talked about people fleeing just to get the hell out of here, forget Illinois. I argue you can't forget Illinois. One, for the reason is that we have to defend what's here. But two, you got to be careful about the spread, because you have to understand Obama came from Illinois. Pritzker would love to be president, and he's talked about his aspirations. You got the Chicago Teachers Union, which is happy to spread all of its policies to any union that will accept them. So you have to be really careful, because I would argue that, we're us with maybe California, whatever, we're ground zero. So if you don't stop the bad things here, they're going to come to your house soon. So that's a big reason for fighting.
Yeah, our readership, interestingly, is a third to a half out of state. Actually, in most weeks, it's half out of state.
You should increase that.
Illinois expatriates, other people properly interested, apparently understand that what's going on in Illinois is important to the rest of the nation. But the flight has been a problem for us. We've called up, for example, a major venture capitalist that, with a lot of money, we expected to give money. Oh, I live in Las Vegas now. Sorry, I wrote off Illinois. We get quite a bit of that. We're a 501c3. We get tax deductible contributions, small and large. Some people are very generous behind the scenes, even if they don't talk up in public. And it's for that reason that we keep our list of contributors confidential, because a lot, how Illinois works, they fear the retribution that would come to them, and small contributors too. A lady that owns a jewelry store, a real estate broker, said, I don't want it to be known that I'm doing this because I don't want to get the mob on me. And big business type, some big names that you would recognize also at Turner's Down said, well, I got this deal pending, that requires city approval. I think that's really cowardly. And, the business community in general, it bears a lot of responsibility for what's happened to Chicago. That's another big lesson. Jim, New York has always had, a background of smart business people that would step up when things got bad, as they did in the early 70s, as you said. Illinois has those quality people, but they've played ball with the radical leftists. Really have been too quiet and bear blame for this.
Can I add something real quick before you ask your next question?
Yeah, sure.
So you guys who are listening to this show too, on the show, we've been doing it for 2 years now. We've ended up raising a lot of money because you guys are not idiots, and you understand that some of the people we have on here desperately need it. And the other side, the site that's fighting against us. And by the way, we did not pick this fight. This fight came to our doorsteps. Conservatives are just people who wanted to live their lives, do their shit, make their money, hang with their family. The collectivists came and brought this war to us. Well, guess what? They're highly organized. That's part of the whole collective nonsense. So people on our side, we have to get out our checkbooks to have these things live. And I know, by the way, I'm not doing this to you guys. We did it for Heritage Foundation. You guys donate to that. We've been able to sell several books that we think are really important because you guys are smart and you know where to send your money. But remember, if we don't get off our wallet, we will lose this fight because they are religious zealot ideologues who will do whatever they can to win. This is weird saying it. I thought if you would have told me this 15 years ago, that it was this fight for the very nature of what our whole society is about, I said you were crazy. And again, here we are. Sorry, that's my rant. Bobby.
No, go ahead, Ted. You were going to say
something. I was just going to add, so what do we do, right? So Governor Pritzker will come out and say that the population in Illinois is growing. We'll go dig into the IRS data. We'll get it. We'll publish it and show what the truth is, right? Where the people are going, how much money we're losing. He'll say that Illinois has record graduation rates. We'll go into the data. We'll go to the NAEP scores, the National Assessment for Educational Progress, and we'll show that just 10% of our Black children can do math at grade level here in Chicago, for example. So we go out, we get the truth, get the data. We do straight talking. We try not to hyperbolize too much. We love being data centric. And we tell it like it is, and that's a big part of what's going on. It's why we've been in the Wall Street Journal. I think in the editorial pages, 16 times in the last 2 years. So we're data centric. We're straight talking. We like to tell it like it is, and it's an honest conversation that we think both the right, the center right, the center left want to hear.
The people are on our side. You go down the list of any of the issues we're going to talk about today. Illinoisans agree with us. We're called conservative. No, we're mainstream. The people in power are radical leftists, and the press that calls us conservatives have inculcated the public into accepting this label of conservative that is false. Everybody thinks that Illinois is very liberal. It's not. It's a moderate state. And the reason that Democrats win, Bobby, is exactly what you said. They are really well organized. They got a ground game like it. They got these public unions that go to bat for them. They bribe voters with public pensions. A lot of reasons like that. And, Republicans just haven't put up very good candidates and been organized and be able to answer that. So the Democrats have known how to win elections. It's true nationally, by the way, too. And that's the problem. We've got a departure of our political class from the public.
Is it an intelligent assumption to say that if people read you and donate to you, they might be able to spot things coming in their state? You talk about the readership naturally, and that should go up. We have a fairly big following outside of Illinois, and those are the people I want to spark to start looking at your stuff. Because again, if I could make Ron DeSantis governor of the 49 of the 50 states, I would, but he's not even going to last down here forever. So I like to look at you guys and say, okay, I think this may educate me if I see some things going in the wrong direction that have already happened in Illinois and you guys are trying to correct. Is that a safe assumption?
Yeah, I'd give a good example of that. In Illinois, we just passed, it's called Amendment 1. It was called the Workers' Rights Amendment. And this is where the unions were able to, and the lawmakers, to put in our Constitution, they basically enshrined all the labor laws that protect the unions. It's in the Constitution now. And that will make it much harder for us in Illinois to battle against some of the crazy union powers. I'm talking about public sector union powers that are in the Constitution. You watch other states try to do the same thing because it just protects the unions and it makes it much harder for ordinary people to fight back.
Yeah, we said earlier, states are laboratories of democracy. They're laboratories of failure too. We're finance guys by background, so we're comfortable digging into the pensions. We've educated ourselves very thoroughly on that stuff over 10 years. The budgets, we understand how those are written. We can call out the bullshit. I see many states, I see the bullshit being written all the time. They don't have somebody like us that's calling out the bullshit. At least give the proper lens through which you should be looking at these things and spotting how things have gone wrong. Because it's that issue of how things that have gone wrong that the public hasn't understood, and we're trying to educate them. And that's how this gap has developed between what the public wants and how they've and the people that they've elected.
So I'm about to sound like a ray of sunshine compared to some of you guys right now, because we said Illinois' problems, which they're mostly financial, because a lot of these things fall from that tree of financial problems. If we are now going, and I believe I post once a week. I explain in great detail how the federal government, the Federal Reserve, intentionally caused massive inflation, and they did so to bail out indebted institutions, particularly like something like the state of Illinois and its unfunded pension problem. Well, however, so that's awful to steal people's money because Illinois can't get their house in order. I think that that's a terrible, terrible thing, but it's been done. And now if we are looking at a 3.2 to 3.5% inflation rate that could continue on for the next several years, it provides a very unique opportunity for Illinois to start getting its bills underway. I reiterate again, it's a bullshit way to do it, but it could be effective if they're going to be smart. Ted, is there any chance that Illinois can be smart and take advantage of increased tax revenues to try to get their house in order so it's not going to be such a monumental and ridiculous debt load?
Well, Jim, I have to tell you that right now the unions are effectively running Illinois, right? They're certainly running Chicago. So the chances of getting reforms out of Chicago is slim. And then the Chicago Democrats run the state house. I would say be very cautious. What I've learned in this last 15 years of doing this here is that anytime things get better, guess what? It's the opposite of what you think. Now there's more money to dole out more benefits. And this is the problem we get into. As soon as things get better, they're going to spend it. So
they always do. I'll stop talking. But before the pandemic even happened, I was on the Dan and Amy show, and I said, if Illinois all of a sudden found a rock that was worth $200 billion on a Tuesday, they'd have that money spent by Thursday under the belief that they were going to find it every Tuesday. And I literally said $200 billion, and this was in 2019.
You nailed it.
Bingo. They found a rock that was worth $200 billion.
On an inflation matter, too, you got to remember that the fixed debt that would benefit from that inflation adjustment is pretty small in Illinois. The bonded debt is $30-some billion. It's the pension debt that's the killer for us, $140 billion. And that adjusts for inflation. They get 3%. That's for tier one. Tier two is renegotiating their deal right now. We don't know what they're going to end up with. So that's not going to get any better. And that's the big albatross around Illinois' neck. 20% of our budget goes to pensions. A few other states have pension problems. A lot of them have pensions, but they don't have that albatross around their neck. So, ultimately the goal is to get Illinois to a reasonable total tax amount with reasonable services, competitive. And with that 20% weight hanging around your neck, you're not going to do it.
Ted?
And Jimmy, the perfect example of what's going on is the CTU head, Stacey Davis Gates. Not only did she say that she wants a contract of $50 billion plus $3, some massive contract, she wants 9% minimum raises in the new contract. So that right there, boom, wipes out any benefits you get. They're right, pensions pop up. So
Jim and I have a mutual client that we do analysis and content for, and once a month I leave the safety and warmth of my home here in Southwest Florida, and I hop on a plane and I go to Chicago, and I stay out by my family in the burbs near Jimmy, actually near Brandt's restaurant. If you haven't been there, Monday.
Brandt's Palatine, open 11 to 11.
Hours are 11 to 11. And then I take the train in to go do the work, right? Just the Northwest train line, whatever it is. And I get there, and so I've done this multiple times now, and I'm still blown away by the silence, the eerie silence in the loop, and the closing of restaurants and coffee shops that all used to be open, and the boarded up windows. And the other day, I was in the offices of this client, and they gave me a conference room to work in. And I looked down, it was 12 o'clock. I'm like, wow, I wonder where people go for lunch now with everything closed. I looked down, there were no people walking around. I literally took a picture of Madison Avenue and sent it to my wife with one person at 12:15 walking on it. You guys called this the doom loop. Can we start with Mark and go to Ted and talk about what you mean by the doom loop?
This is a terrifying problem that affects not just Chicago. Chicago may be among the worst, but it's primarily caused by those empty offices downtown. The average actual occupancy per day is only 50%.
Why do you say actual?
The actual, they measure it by the security cards going in and out. CASO systems publishes numbers every year. And so that's the most looked at data. 50% average occupancy. 80% is leased up. That's a bad number in itself. But eventually those are going to equilibrate. It's going to come down to 50% as, drip, drip, drip each year as those 10-year leases come up. So the doom loop term was coined by a NYU economist about this. So, as those buildings lose renters, they lose valuation. The Aon Center, which some may know as the standard building, a landmark building in Chicago, had its valuation cut in half already. as those have their valuations cut in half, their property taxes obviously are going to sink. That's got to be pushed off on homeowners or somehow made up. The reason that this is terrifying is because, well, one of the causes is correctable, which is crime. The other is this work from home trend. And there's nobody to blame for that. No obvious solution. This is a scary problem that, again, people should watch Chicago for that reason, too. It'll probably come here first and impact us first. But this is coming to most major cities. They, too, have occupancy rates, maybe 60%. Some are worse, even down at 40%. But this is a national problem.
Yeah, and just to add to that, San Francisco, I think, has been the leader in that. And, in the last 3 years alone, San Fran has lost 7% of its population. And that's a big number. That's the kind of number that scares me. If Chicago were to lose, we've lost 3% in the last 3 years. If you start to lose numbers like that and 10%, then you have to watch out, because what Mark's talking about is, you get less people on the trains coming in, you get less tourism, you have less people in the buildings. That means you have less property taxes from those buildings, which means those property taxes get spread to homeowners, which means people flee, right? And you get into that trap. And Wall Street Journal had a good article about St. Louis and what a mess that's become. And you've got empty buildings, you've got people that don't want to buy these what were just not too many years ago great buildings. So we got to watch out. Chicago really has to watch out. That's a big fear for us.
So you mentioned San Francisco, and I was just there. My daughter lives in San Francisco, I think. She keeps saying she's moving back, but I'm not quite sure. But I'm going out there for a graduation in a couple of weeks. But this Mark Benioff, and and we have one of my good friends is good friends of Mark Benioff from Salesforce.com. One of the maddest I've been in the last 2 years was this is a guy who's been giving money to Democratic politicians, been pushing these policies that have destroyed urban centers. And the man has the gall on the last conference call when they posted their earnings to say, yeah, we're thinking of moving out of San Francisco. The crimes just become too bad. I'm listening to the conference call. I think I probably did about $800 worth of damage to technical equipment that I started punching. That's not a question. That's just a statement. But I'd like to move to education, if that's okay with you guys. And Ted, I'll start with you. What can be done when every dollar we donate towards, I remember when Chance the Rapper gave like $5 million to the Chicago public school system. I'm thinking to myself, dude, all you're doing is giving money to pensioners. How little of that goes to the school? It's astounding. What do you think needs to be done there?
Yeah, I think, I've spent, a lot of time on education and looking at the whole system. It's a systemic thing. And when you look at how much money's flowing in, CPS, for example, Chicago Public Schools, almost $30,000 per kid. 8% of Black children can read there. In reading, it's like 16% for Blacks, and Hispanics are just slightly better. There's so much union power. There's so much administrative power. There's so much money there. Nobody wants to upset the apple cart. And if you look and see what happens, you can look at the data. Each year, they just pass them along. No kids can never read at grade level, and then they massively graduate them. And they move on. I think the only big thing left to do, and it's not a silver bullet, by the way, it's school choice. You've got to dramatically change how we do things. You got to upset the thing. It's got to be a disruption. Mark's talked a lot about, we got to break up CPS, for example, but there's a lot that can't be done. All the marginal stuff, forget it. It won't change anything. You got to disrupt the system.
So I'm friendly with Corey DeAngelis. You know the name, right?
Sure.
The School Choice Evangelist has written a great book. And when he sent the book and dedicated it to some of the teachers union presidents across the country, it's literally like a serious dedication. Like, without you, this work couldn't be possible. And to Randy Weingart herself, I thought that was pretty high level trolling. But Mark, can we talk about the migrant thing? Because the migrant thing to me is what's happening now seems kind of wonderful. These idiots like Brandon Johnson said, we want to be a sanctuary city, without even knowing what that looks like. And then all of a sudden we get a bunch of migrants and people are pissed, and particularly the Black community, which we've talked about quite a bit. They seem to be pissed by the inflow of migrants. Is it enough that it could swing voting blocks and have alternate outcomes of elections?
I think it is. Blacks are especially angry about this in Chicago. They're making their voices heard on this. The only group, surprisingly, that showed any sympathy for them in the polls that I've seen has been whites living in Chicago, but across the state and everywhere else, they are very angry about this. And they'll be more angry if they understand the true numbers. Everybody talks about the 40,000 or so migrants that have been bussed up here from Texas. But in fact, there's probably almost 600,000 illegal immigrants in Illinois. If that sounds outrageous, it's not. You can find every study that estimates these things puts it at that number. That the national number is 12 million, 14 million. Illinois by population is about 1/20th of the country. You come up to about 600,000. That's a reasonable estimate. They are soaking up a lot of money. The cost of that truly attributed to them. It's not just for those direct migrant costs for the bust in. It's all the other services that have to be provided for any citizen. We're talking about $6 billion just for Illinois. Nationally, $160 billion or something. Some estimates go up to over $300 billion for the nation as a whole. That's not unreasonable. And people are complaining about housing costs. Well, there's 12 or 14 million people living in the country. They're living someplace. You don't think that drives up housing costs somehow? Of course it does. And people are gradually figuring this out. I think it's a huge issue for incumbents this year.
If we could, I want to add to the migrants conversation, but I want to go back to education for 1 second, Ted, if we could. When you talk about making a big splash, one of the strangest things that people don't seem to realize about something like CPS, the Chicago Public Schools and their teachers union, is that they're so powerful. They have so much backing. And you guys mentioned they run the state. I don't remember which one of you mentioned it. And yet they vote for the people that they then negotiate with, who then they vote back in. What's the path, man? And this is part of my exasperation with my old home. It's like, what is the path to breaking that? Is it actually getting people of color and other people to say, look, we've had enough of this. We want charter schools and protest in the street and the kind of things that they do, that the left does for other causes?
Well, yeah, you guys being financial guys would appreciate it. It used to be in the good old days, the financial markets used to correct things. You get punished for mismanagement, but the bailouts changed all that. And so now, Mark and I have been saying this for a long time. It's going to take a while now for the burden of all these mistakes to finally show up. And maybe some of that's starting to happen, as Mark mentioned, with the blacks being upset over the migration. And at some point, the blacks and the Hispanics need to be upset with the fact that their kids can't read in these schools. They need to be upset with all the crime that goes on in the streets. We don't know yet, Bobby, when this changes, but at some point it has to change. But I tell you what we do know, and again, this is the part you mentioned. In Illinois, for example, we enshrine the powers of the unions to strike, for example, and to collectively bargain. Governments in Illinois have to bargain with the unions. In Texas, for example, it's illegal for governments to bargain with the teachers union. So we know what the right laws are. We shouldn't give the unions power over the people. It should be the other way around, like they have in Texas. And so we know where we want to get to. The question is, how do we get there?
I want to throw out to Chance the Rapper, who I know is a listener of this show. He's probably not. He might want to get $5 million to you guys rather than CPS if he wants to see actual change. Go ahead, Jim.
Chance the Rapper almost ran me down on Financial Place about 4 years ago in like a beige Mercedes. He lives in the West Loop, I think, right? I was pissed.
He does.
I could see him come by. He was going like 80 miles an hour in Financial Place.
Ahead,
you mentioned the financial aspect of this, Ted, and you mentioned that we were a notch above junk prior to 2020. Now, I always argue, I argued 10 years ago. Now, for those of you guys, most of the people who watch the show are financial. You know that these rating agencies bend over backwards and do all kinds of squinting to not move a state bond down to junk, because then pension funds all over the country cannot hold Illinois bonds. Correct, Ted, right?
That's right.
So I always argued even 10, 12 years ago that I thought one of the reasons Illinois bonds traded at the rating that they are, because deep down, everybody knows there's a federal bailout coming if the shit really hits the fan. Ted, do you agree that's going to be the plan?
Well, I think it's the plan for a lot of people, yeah, because they say, look, this is why they don't mind underfunded pensions here in Illinois. They'd rather push up the benefits and know that somebody's going to plug the hole.
Yeah.
And that's always been the case. So that's why they don't, collectively, these unions and these lawmakers, they don't care that it's underfunded because somebody will bail it out. The question is going to be, if ever, at the national level, and this may happen right now if Trump and the Republicans can win, is that the bailouts won't be there. But God knows what that means. 10 years from now, 15 years from now, I don't know what happens, right? But bailouts.
So I want to add something to what Ted just said. So these are four guys who are probably all voting for Trump. I'd venture a guess that we don't think that Trump is any sort of great guy. He's just the counterbalance to the madness that's going on. I don't mean to speak for you guys. And again, that's just my opinion. But the point of it is that I was about to say is we fully believe that it is probably worse for Illinois in the short term if Trump gets in, because the bailout part of the equation might go away. And we're doing that anyway for medium and long-term success. Is that an accurate way to say it, Mark?
Jim, we got this weird conflict at the federal level that, I think you've addressed before. We got the Fed trying to lean against inflation by crimping the economy with higher interest rates. But the Treasury is spending money like we're in a deflationary recession, at double the rate that Trump did under the Republicans, and it was too high then.
While they keep telling us how great an economy we have, they keep looking at it. There's no sort of Keynesian economist in the world would advocate for spending this kind of money in a good economy like they claim. Sorry to cut you off.
So, Trump's not immune about borrowing money. He figures he can stiff the lenders in the long run. I don't know what to do with, and if the Republicans, so I'm not going to venture a guess about how that would shake out. But there's certainly going to be a lot more scrutiny about where the money is going, I think, and it wouldn't be good for Illinois.
Yeah, just a quick point there that to me is so critical. The day after, the week after Detroit went bankrupt, I got in with a buddy and I went to Detroit for my first time to go find out what happened. And, anybody who looks at Detroit knows a lot of that had to do with, of course, the car industry and all that. But the big issue was losing people. And as you lost pockets of people, you lost your whites, then you lost your middle class blacks, et cetera. The more people you lost your tax base, you lost your power to do anything. And my concern about Chicago, and I love Chicago, and my parents were immigrants to Chicago. It's a great city. But my concern is that if you start losing people too fast, we're going to get into the deep kind of trouble that we can't get out of. So I would much rather the financial crisis happen ASAP while we have everything intact than have it happen 15 years from now when we lose companies and CME and whatever, and then we struggle to ever make it back.
So when Detroit too, the history of Detroit is fabulous. For most of you people watching know this. But as they started, they called it white flight. It was green flight. Money was leaving. So what they did to address that is to plug up their tax. Instead of thinking why people were leaving, they passed was it a 1.5% living inside the state tax, which really enriched every community that was borderline in the city. I'm living inside the city, I meant to say. It's just absolutely ridiculous. We've covered the migrants, we've covered schools, and we've covered finances. I know there was a couple other things you wanted to hit. Bobby, go.
Yeah. First of all, I'm writing Larry Elder in when I go vote this year. That's who I'm voting for.
Fair enough.
I want to talk about green policies. And the reason I want to talk about it, Mark, is because Illinois is obviously famously proud of what they're doing in the sort of green space, their little mini Green New Deal that they're trying to push through. And there is some state government support for certain forms of green energy here in Florida. So it's a two-part question. Number one, can you go into Illinois' disastrous green policy? And number two, do you see Florida or any other state going down the wrong path, doing it right, or you don't know either way because it's just too small?
Well, first, Illinois has really bet the ranch on this. We have it's called the Clean Energy Jobs Act a few years ago, massively pushed our electricity production into wind and solar. This part of the lesson is extensible to other states, all of them. They forgot that you have to hook up these new projects to something. It's the connection lines that are an issue. And there's a lot written about. There's bipartisan recognition of this problem in Congress. Even Sean Casten, one of our congressmen, who has been a champion of all the green stuff, has said that some 80% of our new projects may have no place to hook up to. And this is a vastly expensive, potentially $1 trillion problem to be solved, if it can be solved at all, because building new transmission lines puts you into a rat nest. You got to deal with, there's different owners, different state and local governments that get involved. You got property rights of the people you got to cross, eminent domain, all the other stuff. It's very difficult to build these things. So that part of it is crashing. And of course, we've bet the ranch on EVs too, with direct handouts to Stellantis. Pritzker hasn't told us how much of the package is on that. It's probably over 500 million, we think. There's a green bus company in Joliet. Goshen, a Chinese company with close ties to the Chinese Communist Party, is getting $536 million in state aid plus $7.5 billion in federal tax credits.
From the Inflation Reduction Act.
From the Inflation Reduction Act, yes, happily named, right?
And of course, Rivian, he's throwing more money into Rivian now too. Well, people aren't buying EVs, so people ought to be watching that very closely if their states have investments in EV plants. Georgia just got stung. They had a $1 billion project on the line for Rivian. Rivian ended up, because of their cash situation, having to turn them down and come to Illinois to use their existing plant for this. So I am not familiar with Florida's projects. And, I don't have any problem with investing in renewables to the extent that you're trying to make them legitimately cost competitive with conventional sources. That's not where we're putting it. We're putting money into the existing technology, which is not there yet. And
in Florida, it's mostly incentives to put solar panels on your house and make it part of the electricity generation for your home. They don't want you to convert your entire home to solar. They don't incentivize that. They incentivize a little bit of installation as a backup, the kind of thing that could potentially power a generator or even the whole home post-hurricane, because post-hurricane tend to be hot and muggy and sunny days. So a lot of people down here, they own generators that are solar powered because they can put them outside after the storm and power their house till the actual power comes back on.
Well, hey, it's Sunshine State still. Maybe that
there
works.
You go. It's a good idea.
Can we bring back to finance real quick for you people who are watching? Bobby knows exactly what my biggest position over the last 2 years has been, and that's copper for the things we're talking about. But one thing I don't know if you know, Bobby, I haven't told you, I've started amassing an uranium position now as well. All these things that they're talking about, and then you throw in the AI thing. They're building these big AI data centers, which require a crap ton of electricity. We are not getting away from that. Just wanted to bring it back to finances for 1 second.
Those commodities are zooming. Is that what you attribute it to?
Well, no. I think commodities are zooming.
It's one of the things, for sure.
Yeah, but for the most part, I think the biggest factor of it is like those commodities zooming are like zero confidence in the stewardship of our currency, and people are starting to get into things away from dollars. Now, the ones that are outperforming, I think, like copper's been on an absolute tear because then you add in the secondary thesis of the electrification of the grid. So that's what I think.
If you talk copper specifically, for example, the supply-demand imbalance is well known. It's been going on for a while. And Southern Copper, which is a massive mining company, just got past decades of opposition in Peru from environmentalists, and they had licensing and probably bribes. I don't know that for a fact. And they're about to open a mine that's about to add 120,000 tons of copper a year. And now they're just starting. They expect to break ground in like 2024 while the demand for copper continues to accelerate. Real quick, guys, I have a family member who's a Chicago police officer. You know what keeps him awake at night right now? I could tell you dozens of stories about how a lot of Chicago police officers, with the tough job that they do, don't feel it's worth it for them to get out of their cars anymore and try and stop crimes in progress. But he stays awake at night because the Democratic Convention is coming. So what do you guys see, maybe to you, Ted, what do you guys see how do you see that shaking out?
For me, these kind of things are impossible to predict, but, we've seen what's happened in other cities from time to time. Right now, you've got this Palestinian, Jewish, Hamas issue going on, and they're promising they're gonna push it during the convention. Crime, can we control our crime in the middle of the summers when our crime hits the highest? You got the migrant issue; people are ticked off. It's a potential powder keg, but I'm not good at predicting these things. But I sure as hell would be worried, and if I were a policeman, I would be worried. And if I were a city, somebody who's from Chicago, I'd be worried because Brandon Johnson has shown not to be a leader. Let me give you one quick story on this. When we have had these kids, hundreds of kids wilding, as they call it, in the city, he wouldn't come down. Johnson wouldn't come down on them. He said they were just kids being silly. He's not serious. And I think it's a really dangerous time because, as Mark recently wrote, we don't know whether Johnson's going to be on the side of the protesters or the side of the police. And when you have that question about your mayor, you're in big trouble.
Yeah, and that wasn't me talking. That was Politico quoting people in the Democratic Party who were worried that Brandon is going to be on the side of the protesters. Real Clear had a lengthy article to that effect as well. And you've got this, it's a coalition formed. What started out as a good faith criticism of Israeli policy in the war and with Palestine civilians became a coalition in Chicago, and this has been pretty well documented. They've joined forces with Black Lives Matter Chicago, a bunch of national, pro-Palestinian groups. Antifa apparently is making their appearance in these things. There were all kinds of outsiders at the various campus demonstrations that we had lately, and they've said openly, we're going to protest at the Democratic National Convention with or without a permit. And no permits have been issued because there's a mess about where they can protest. The ACLU says they have to be within sight and sound distance. We have a real potential mess shaping up.
When's the date of the convention again?
August 23, I believe, late August.
I'm going to be on vacation that day, I think, too. I have a question. So before I made a plea for money for you guys, but as a starter, can you guys do us a favor? You can subscribe to Wirepoints, right? What do you do to do that? You go to wirepoints.com. I know I'm a subscriber. I don't remember how I did.
Yeah, it's free. Go to the website, wirepoints.org, and in the right column, it says sign up for our free daily newsletter or our weekend summary or both, whichever you want. And that's right. And by the way, we do a great job aggregating not just our own work, but everybody's, all other stories from all voices. It's a very good balanced opinion. So
if you guys who are listening, again, not pressure. We are kind of all on the same team, and we've established this over the last couple of years, and we are good at bringing the right people together. So at the very least, could you guys go to wirepoints.org, sign up for the free newsletter, just read what these guys are talking about, because I think you will be impressed is not the right word. I think you'll be angered and amazed at the research of their work. What's another good way to find you guys, Ted?
Well, yeah, on Instagram at Wirepoints, you'll find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And just one quick plug. We're a small group. We've never gotten big. We didn't want to become too big, and that means we're really fast, and we're not bureaucratic. So we get to say what we want to say, which is important. We don't hold back, and as you say, we hit both sides. We hit bad policies, regardless of who's doing them.
Everyone, like Bobby said before, I'll reiterate. I thought I was a liberal 30 years ago. I still think I am. Liberal means fighting for individual liberties. How do these people just get to look at me and say I'm some sort of MAGA? Like the four of us. All we want is for people to have rights. This whole thing has become asinine. We're going to close out the show, but again, you guys who watch this show, Oben and Bobby's got something. Go.
Yeah, I was just looking up the date just to make sure we had it, and I didn't find it. But the first thing that came up, the DNC is preparing for the worst in Chicago without the help of city's mayor, political.
That's the first headline.
That's the very first thing that comes up on a DuckDuckGo search, because I don't use Google anymore.
So these people have done, these three guys have done a good job of convincing me that all hope is lost. I still don't think all hope is lost.
I just want to say one thing to people watching this. It's not Mark and Ted asking for money. It's Jim and I asking you to donate, because this, I think, is a better use of your money than to a political candidate at this stage, especially if you're in Illinois. I'm out of Illinois and Chicago, and it's still in my heart. So I'm going to be one of those people donating. Yep.
Donate or sign up for wirepoints.org free newsletter. You guys won't be sorry. I read it every day. Thank you guys so much. Remember what Bobby and I's mission was. There's going to come a day where you can't have a media outlet like this. We had a show on the carnivore diet. You better believe in 3 years it's going to be illegal to have a show on the carnivore diet. So we are trying to buck the system. We both are refugees from mainstream media. We washed out of there because we couldn't say exactly what we thought. So on our platform here, you might disagree with our opinion. You might think our opinion is moronic, but at least you'll know it is our honest opinion, and we are not reflecting any sort of sponsor's belief. We sought out Wirepoints to come on our show to talk about them. We're not kowtowing to any sort of sponsor. So thank you guys. And it wouldn't be possible without you. This has been The Future's Edge.
Thank you so much, guys.
Hey, thank you guys for having us.